I'm Rachel Thompson, a 28-year-old physical therapist living in Portland, Oregon. And this is the story of how what I thought was my sister's harmless childhood game turned into a federal criminal investigation that would expose a web of abuse I never saw coming. You might think you've heard family drama before. The classic tale of sibling rivalry gone too far, maybe some jealousy between sisters. But I promise you, this story has a twist that will completely shatter everything you think you know about the people closest to you. They say family secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. In my case, that couldn't have been more terrifyingly true. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in my cozy Hawthorne District apartment. I was getting ready for work at the Riverside Physical Therapy Center, where I'd been building my practice for the past 3 years. I loved my job, helping people recover from injuries, watching them regain strength and mobility. The irony of what was about to happen to me wasn't lost on anyone, especially later when the detectives interviewed my colleagues. My name is Rachel Thompson, and at 28, I thought I had my life figured out. Growing up in the suburbs of Beaverton with my parents, Daniel and Patricia Thompson, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My father worked as an accountant for a local construction company, putting in steady 40-hour weeks, while my mother taught third grade at the elementary school just down the street from our house. They provided a stable, middle-class upbringing that I was grateful for. But there was always something different about my relationship with my younger sister, Amber. She was 24 now, 4 years my junior, and still living in our childhood home with our parents. While I'd moved out after college and established my independence, Amber seemed content to remain in that familiar bubble. She worked part-time at a local coffee shop, nothing too demanding, and spent most of her free time on what she called her creative projects. Amber had always been the artistic one in the family. Where I was practical and focused on my studies, she was spontaneous and imaginative. Our parents often praised her creativity, her ability to think outside the box, her unique perspective on life. As children, she was constantly inventing games, elaborate scenarios that would consume our weekends and school breaks. "Rachel, let's play the trust game," she'd say, her eyes lighting up with that familiar mischievous sparkle. These games always involved some element of physical challenge or test of courage. Sometimes it was seeing who could hold their breath longer underwater in our backyard pool. Other times it was elaborate obstacle courses she'd construct in our basement, timing each other as we navigated through her creations. Looking back now, I realized there was always something slightly off about these games. They weren't the typical childhood activities you'd expect siblings to engage in. There was often an element of pain involved, disguised as fun. Amber would convince me to participate in increasingly risky challenges, always framing them as bonding experiences between sisters. The game that broke my arm happened 3 weeks ago during what was supposed to be a casual Sunday family dinner at our parents' house. I'd been looking forward to it all week. Work had been particularly stressful, with several complex cases requiring extra attention, and I was excited to just relax with my family. Amber greeted me at the door with her usual enthusiasm. "Rachel, perfect timing. I've been working on this amazing new trust exercise. It's inspired by those team building activities they do at corporate retreats, but way more fun." Our parents were in the kitchen, busy with dinner preparations, so it was just Amber and me in the living room. She explained her latest creation with the same animated energy she had as a child. The game involved a series of movements that supposedly built trust and communication between participants. "It's all about reading each other's energy," she explained, demonstrating various positions and movements. "You have to completely surrender control and trust that I'll guide you safely through each transition." The exercise started innocently enough. Simple movements, gentle guidance, nothing that seemed dangerous. But then Amber began incorporating more complex elements. She had me close my eyes and follow her lead through increasingly challenging positions. "Trust me, Rachel, this is the most important part. You have to completely let go of control." I remember feeling slightly uncomfortable, but I didn't want to seem like I was being overly cautious or ruining her enthusiasm. Amber had always been sensitive about criticism of her creative projects, and our parents had always encouraged us to support each other's interests. The final movement involved Amber guiding me through what she called a controlled fall. I was supposed to lean backward while she supported my weight, demonstrating complete trust in her ability to keep me safe. On the count of 3, she said, positioning herself behind me, 1, 2. But something went wrong on 3. Instead of the gentle, controlled descent she'd described, I felt her hands suddenly release. I was already committed to the backward motion, and with nothing to stop my fall, I crashed hard onto the hardwood floor of our parents' living room. The pain was immediate and excruciating. My left arm had taken the full impact of the fall, and I knew instantly that something was seriously wrong. The bone had snapped with a sound that still makes me nauseous to remember. Amber's reaction was what I remember most clearly from those first chaotic moments. Instead of the panic and concern you'd expect from someone whose game had just seriously injured their sister, she seemed almost excited. There was this strange energy about her, like she was experiencing some kind of rush from what had happened. "Oh my God, Rachel," she said, but her tone didn't match the gravity of the situation. "I'm so sorry. The trust exercises can be tricky when you're first learning them. You must have tensed up at the wrong moment." Even through the pain, something about her response felt off. She was already creating a narrative about what had happened, explaining away the incident before anyone had even asked for an explanation. Our parents rushed in when they heard me screaming. Mom immediately called 911, while Dad tried to keep me calm and still until the paramedics arrived. Amber hovered nearby, continuing her explanation about the trust exercise gone wrong to anyone who would listen. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor confirmed what we all suspected: a severe compound fracture that would require surgery. They scheduled me for an operation the following morning and prescribed pain medication to get me through the night. "We'll need to do some imaging before the surgery," Dr. Martinez explained. "An MRI will give us a clear picture of the bone fragments and help us plan the best approach for repair." As I lay in that hospital bed, heavily medicated but still in considerable pain, I kept replaying the afternoon's events in my mind. Something about Amber's behavior continued to bother me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what felt wrong. Our parents stayed with me through the night, taking turns holding my good hand and reassuring me that everything would be fine. Amber visited briefly, bringing flowers and a get-well card she'd made herself, decorated with drawings of the two of us as children playing her various games. "I feel terrible about what happened," she said, though again, her emotional response seems somehow disconnected from her words. "But you know, Rachel, this could actually be really good material for your physical therapy work. Now you'll understand what your patients go through from a first-hand perspective." Even in my medicated state, that comment struck me as incredibly insensitive. The idea that my serious injury could be viewed as a professional development opportunity was disturbing, but everyone attributed it to Amber's awkward way of trying to find positive aspects in difficult situations. The next morning, as they wheeled me into the MRI machine, I had no idea that the images they were about to capture would reveal something far more sinister than bone fragments. I was just a woman with a broken arm, trusting that modern medicine would put me back together. I had no way of knowing that within 48 hours, FBI agents would be sitting in my hospital room asking questions that would force me to re-examine every interaction I'd ever had with my sister. The person I thought I knew best in the world was about to become a complete stranger, and the game that broke my arm was about to expose a pattern of behavior that had been hiding in plain sight for years. But we'll get to that revelation soon enough. First, you need to understand just how deep this deception went and how many warning signs I'd missed along the way. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. The surgery went better than expected, according to Dr. Martinez. 3 hours of delicate work to realign the bone fragments and insert a titanium plate that would hold everything in place while I healed. When I woke up in recovery, my arm was immobilized in a cast that extended from my shoulder to my fingertips. "You'll be looking at 6 to 8 weeks of recovery," the doctor explained during his post-surgery visit. "No weight bearing on that arm whatsoever.
Physical therapy will start in about 3 weeks once the initial healing phase is complete. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a physical therapist who helped people recover from exactly these kinds of injuries, now facing my own long rehabilitation journey. My colleagues at Riverside Physical Therapy had already arranged coverage for my patients, and my boss, Janet, assured me that my job would be waiting when I was ready to return. But as the days passed in that hospital room, something began to gnaw at me. It wasn't just the physical pain, though that was considerable even with the medication. It was the growing collection of details about that Sunday afternoon that didn't quite add up.
Amber visited every day, sometimes twice, always with some small gift or gesture. Homemade cookies, magazines, playlists she'd created for my recovery. On the surface, she was the perfect concerned sister. But there were moments, brief flashes, where I caught something in her expression that made me uncomfortable. During one visit, while she was adjusting my pillows, I mentioned how strange it felt to be completely dependent on others for basic tasks. "It must be frustrating," she said, but there was something in her tone that sounded almost satisfied. Being so helpless, having to rely on everyone else for everything? When I looked at her directly, she quickly shifted back to her concerned sister persona, but I'd seen something underneath. A fleeting expression that looked almost like pleasure at my vulnerability. My parents were struggling with guilt, particularly my mother. She kept apologizing for not being in the room when it happened, for not somehow preventing the accident. Dad had thrown himself into practical matters, researching the best rehabilitation facilities and consulting with specialists about my recovery timeline. "I just keep thinking we should have been more careful about those games," Mom said during one of her visits. "Amber's always been so creative, but maybe we should have set more boundaries when you were children." That comment stuck with me. I began thinking more systematically about Amber's childhood games and the patterns I'd never really examined before. The more I remembered, the more uncomfortable I became. There was a time when I was 12 and she convinced me to participate in a courage test that involved standing on the edge of our garage roof. I'd slipped and barely caught myself, but Amber had seemed disappointed that I hadn't fallen completely. Then there was the endurance challenge when I was 14, where she'd convinced me to see how long I could hold my hand in a bucket of ice water. I'd ended up with mild frostbite, but she insisted I was giving up too early and needed to push through the discomfort. The swimming pool incident when I was 16 came back to me with startling clarity. Amber had created an elaborate underwater obstacle course and challenged me to complete it while holding my breath. I'd nearly drowned when I got disoriented and couldn't find the surface quickly enough. Even as I gasped and coughed up water, she'd criticized my panic response and suggested we try again once I'd learned to stay calmer. Each memory brought a growing realization that these hadn't been normal sibling activities. There had been a consistent pattern of Amber pushing me into increasingly dangerous situations, always framed as games or challenges, always with her as the one in control. But the most disturbing part was remembering her reactions when things went wrong. She never seemed genuinely concerned or frightened when I got hurt. Instead, there was always this strange fascination, like she was observing an interesting experiment rather than watching her sister in pain. My friend Jessica, who worked as a nurse in the hospital's psychiatric ward, stopped by during one of her breaks. We'd known each other since college, and she had a way of cutting through emotional confusion with her clinical training. "Rachel, can I ask you something that might sound weird? When you talk about this accident, there's something in your voice that doesn't sound like you're describing an accident. It sounds like you're trying to convince yourself of something." Her observation hit me like a physical blow. She was right. Every time I told the story, I found myself emphasizing certain details about the trust exercise and Amber's explanation, as if I was trying to make the narrative fit better. "What if it wasn't an accident?" Jessica asked gently. "I know that sounds crazy, but humor me for a second.
What if someone wanted to hurt you but needed it to look accidental? The question sent chills through my entire body, not because it seemed impossible, but because it suddenly seemed entirely possible. That night, I called my cousin David, who worked as a detective with the Portland Police Bureau. We'd always been close, and I trusted his judgment about people and situations. "David, I need to ask you something confidential," I said when he answered. "If someone wanted to hurt a family member but make it look accidental, what would that look like?" There was a long pause. "Rachel, are you safe right now? Is someone threatening you?" No, nothing like that. This is hypothetical. I'm just, trying to understand something." He was quiet for another moment. Hypothetically, the most common pattern we see is escalation over time, small incidents that build up to bigger ones. Usually there's a history of accidents that seem to happen around the same person, and the perpetrator often has a way of controlling the narrative about what happened. Every word he said felt like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. They're also usually very good at appearing concerned and helpful afterward. Classic manipulation behavior. They create the crisis, then position themselves as the rescuer or the supportive family member. After hanging up, I lay awake most of the night thinking about Amber's behavior since the accident. Her constant visits, her thoughtful gifts, her apparent concern. What if it wasn't genuine care, but rather fascination with the results of her actions?
The next morning brought an unexpected development. Dr. Martinez came in with a concerned expression, carrying my chart and what looked like additional paperwork. "Rachel, we've completed our analysis of your MRI images, and I need to discuss something with you. The fracture pattern in your arm is unusual." He pulled up the images on his tablet and showed me the bone fragments. Even to my untrained eye, the break looked severe and complex. "In my 15 years of orthopedic surgery, I've seen thousands of fractures from falls," he continued. "This injury pattern is consistent with a much more forceful impact than what you've described. The angle of the break, the way the bone shattered, it suggests a fall from a significantly greater height or with additional force applied." My stomach dropped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that based on these images, your injury doesn't match the mechanism of injury you've reported. A simple backward fall onto a hardwood floor, even from standing height, wouldn't typically create this type of fracture pattern." He paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say next. "Rachel, I'm required by law to report certain types of injuries when the evidence doesn't match the explanation provided. This fracture pattern is consistent with what we might see in cases of intentional harm." The room started spinning. "Intentional harm? You mean someone did this to me on purpose?" "I'm not making that determination," he said carefully. "I'm simply reporting what the medical evidence shows. There will be some people who want to ask you additional questions about what happened." Within 2 hours, Detective Sarah Chin from the Portland Police Bureau was sitting beside my hospital bed, along with a woman who introduced herself as Agent Lisa Rodriguez from the FBI's Domestic Violence Task Force. "Rachel, we understand this is difficult, but we need you to walk us through exactly what happened on Sunday afternoon. Every detail you can remember." As I told the story again, I found myself paying attention to their reactions. When I described Amber's trust exercise and the moment she released her hands, I saw them exchange glances. "Has your sister ever been involved in other accidents or incidents where you or other family members were injured?" Agent Rodriguez asked. The question opened a floodgate of memories I'd been suppressing. I told them about the garage roof incident, the ice water challenge, the swimming pool near drowning. With each story, their expressions grew more serious. "Rachel, what we're going to tell you next might be difficult to hear. Based on the medical evidence and the pattern of incidents you've described, we have reason to believe your sister may have intentionally caused your injury." The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about Amber, about our relationship, suddenly shifted into a completely different focus.
We'd like your permission to investigate this further, Agent Rodriguez said. That would include interviewing other family members, examining the scene where the incident occurred, and looking into any previous reports or incidents involving your sister. As I signed the paperwork authorizing their investigation, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. The woman I'd shared a childhood with, who I'd trusted completely, who I'd always seen as my creative, quirky little sister, might have been systematically hurting me for years. But what I didn't know yet was that my case was about to become the key to unlock something much larger. Within 48 hours, the investigation would reveal that Amber's games had extended far beyond our family, and that I was just the latest victim in a pattern of behavior that had been escalating for years. The real shock was still coming, and it would change not just my understanding of my sister, but my understanding of how many other people had been suffering in silence, dismissing their own accidents as bad luck or clumsiness, never realizing they were being systematically targeted by someone they trusted. The investigation moved faster than I could have imagined. Detective Chen called me the next morning with news that made my blood run cold. "Rachel, we need to talk immediately. Can Agent Rodriguez and I come to your room this morning? We've discovered something significant." They arrived within an hour, both carrying thick files and wearing expressions that told me whatever they'd found was serious. Detective Chen pulled her chair close to my bed, while Agent Rodriguez set up a small recording device. "We ran Amber's name through our database last night, and what we found suggests your case is connected to something much larger than we initially thought." She opened the first file and spread out several photographs and documents. Over the past 5 years, there have been 7 separate incidents in the Portland metro area involving serious injuries that occurred during what witnesses described as games or trust exercises led by a young woman matching your sister's description.
The victims all described similar scenarios, Agent Rodriguez added. An enthusiastic young woman who approached them at social gatherings, workshops, or community events. She'd gain their trust, introduce some kind of physical activity disguised as therapy or personal growth, and then guide them into situations where they suffered serious injuries. I stared at the photographs, trying to process what they were telling me. "You're saying Amber has been doing this to strangers?" "We believe so, but here's where it gets more complicated." Detective Chen opened the second file. "Yesterday, after our conversation with you, we contacted the organizers of various workshops and retreats in the area. 3 different organizations confirmed that someone named Amber Thompson had attended their events as a participant, and that serious accidents had occurred during informal activities she'd initiated with other attendees." The room felt like it was spinning. How is that possible? I mean, how did no one connect these incidents before? "Because they occurred across different jurisdictions and at private events," Agent Rodriguez explained. "The victims typically attributed the injuries to their own clumsiness or bad luck. The activities were presented as voluntary, and your sister was skilled at making the incidents appear accidental." Detective Chen pulled out another document. "We also discovered that Amber has been using different variations of her name at these events. Sometimes she's Amber Thompson, sometimes she's Amy Thompson, occasionally she's Amelia Thomas. Similar enough that anyone who knew her casually wouldn't notice, but different enough to avoid creating an obvious pattern." I felt sick. "So she's been systematically hurting people for years?" "It appears so. But Rachel, there's something else we need to discuss." Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "We executed a search warrant on your parents' house this morning. What we found in Amber's room suggests this behavior started much earlier than we initially thought." She opened a tablet and showed me photographs from the search. Amber's bedroom looked like a shrine to injury and trauma. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings about accidents, medical articles about various types of injuries, and disturbingly, photographs of people in casts, wheelchairs, and other medical equipment. "We found detailed journals dating back 8 years," Detective Chen said. Amber has been documenting every incident, including the ones involving you. She wrote detailed descriptions of each person's reactions to pain, their recovery processes, and her own emotional responses to causing the injuries. The photographs showed pages of Amber's handwriting, neat and methodical. I could see fragments of text describing subject responses and optimal force calculations and trust establishment protocols. This is sociopathic behavior, Agent Rodriguez said bluntly. Your sister has been conducting what she views as experiments on human pain tolerance and recovery. She's been treating people like test subjects. Detective Chen showed me another photograph from Amber's room. We also found this. It was a detailed floor plan of our parents' living room, marked with measurements and angles. There were calculations written in the margins, and a red X marking the exact spot where I'd fallen. She planned your injury, Rachel? This wasn't a spontaneous game or an accident. She calculated the precise angle and force needed to break your arm, and she orchestrated the entire scenario to achieve that result. I couldn't speak. The sister I'd grown up with, who I'd shared countless memories with, had been systematically planning to hurt me. Not just me, but strangers she met at random events. There's more, Agent Rodriguez said gently. We found video recordings. My stomach dropped. What kind of recordings? What kind of recordings? Amber has been secretly filming many of these incidents. We found a hidden camera setup that she's been using to document people's injuries and their immediate reactions. She's been collecting footage of human suffering like some people collect stamps. Detective Chen showed me a list on her tablet. We've identified 12 victims so far, including you. The injuries range from minor fractures to severe trauma requiring multiple surgeries. One woman nearly died from internal bleeding after an incident at a wellness retreat. How did she get away with this for so long? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Because she's very, very good at what she does. She targets people who are seeking connection or personal growth, people attending workshops, retreats, therapy groups, individuals who are vulnerable and eager to trust. She presents herself as helpful and enthusiastic, gains their confidence, and then exploits that trust. Detective Chen pulled out another file. We also discovered that Amber has been researching her victims beforehand. She has detailed profiles on each person, including their medical histories, psychological vulnerabilities, and social connections. She's been selecting targets based on who would be least likely to suspect intentional harm. What about our parents? Do they know about any of this? We interviewed them this morning after executing the search warrant. They're completely shocked. They had no idea about any of this behavior. They thought Amber was just creative and enthusiastic about helping people explore new activities. Detective Chen leaned back in her chair. Your parents are devastated, Rachel. They're struggling to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the evidence we've shown them. Your father actually said he feels like he's been living with a stranger for 24 years. The weight of everything they were telling me was overwhelming. My entire childhood, every interaction with Amber, every game or challenge she had created suddenly took on a sinister new meaning.
Where is she now? I asked. We arrested her this morning at the coffee shop where she works, Detective Chen said. She's being held without bail on multiple charges of assault, battery, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm. The FBI is also looking into potential federal charges if we can prove she crossed state lines to target victims. Agent Rodriguez opened her tablet to show me another document. Rachel, we need you to understand how significant your case is. You're the first victim who survived with clear medical evidence of intentional harm. Your MRI results, combined with the physical evidence we found in her room, give us the strongest case we've ever had against this type of predator. What happens now? I asked. Now we build a case that ensures she can never hurt anyone else, Detective Chen said. We're working with prosecutors to pursue the maximum possible charges. Based on the evidence we've collected, we're looking at potential sentences ranging from 15 years to life imprisonment. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. But Rachel, we need your help. There are likely other victims who haven't come forward yet, people who still think their injuries were accidents. We need you to be willing to testify about your experience and help us identify any other incidents you might remember. As they packed up their files and prepared to leave, Detective Chen handed me a card. There's one more thing you should know. The reason we were able to move so quickly on this investigation is because Amber made a critical mistake with your case. What kind of mistake? She kept the video recording of your injury on her computer. We have clear footage of her deliberately releasing her grip and watching you fall. We can see her facial expression when you hit the ground, and Rachel, she's smiling. She's actually smiling as you scream in pain. After they left, I sat alone in my hospital room trying to process everything I'd learned. The woman I'd called my sister for 28 years was a predator who had been systematically hurting people for nearly a decade. She'd been documenting their pain, collecting their suffering, and planning increasingly elaborate ways to cause harm while maintaining her facade of helpful enthusiasm. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Honey, we're coming to see you. We need to talk about everything the police told us. We're so sorry. We had no idea." As I waited for my parents to arrive, I realized that this was just the beginning. The investigation would uncover more victims, more evidence, more details about the extent of Amber's deception. But what haunted me most was the realization that every moment of trust, every shared laugh, every childhood memory I had with my sister had been tainted by her secret pleasure in causing pain. The person I thought I knew best in the world had never existed at all. My parents arrived at the hospital that afternoon looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. Mom's eyes were red and swollen from crying, while Dad moved with the careful, deliberate steps of someone trying to hold himself together through sheer willpower. They had just come from the police station, where they'd spent hours being interviewed about Amber's behavior and looking at evidence that shattered their understanding of their own daughter. "Rachel, we're so sorry," Mom said, barely getting the words out before breaking down completely. "We failed you. We failed to protect you from our own child." Dad pulled up a chair and sat heavily, his hands shaking as he reached for mine. 24 years. We lived with her for 24 years and never saw what she really was. How is that possible? The guilt they were carrying was devastating to witness. They'd spent the morning learning that their youngest daughter had been systematically hurting people, including me, for years. The police had shown them Amber's journals, her video recordings, her detailed plans. They'd seen evidence that their creative, artistic daughter was actually a calculating predator. The detective showed us the footage, the video of what she did to you. "Rachel, we watched our daughter deliberately hurt our other daughter, and she was enjoying it. How do we live with that knowledge?" Over the next few hours, my parents shared details from their police interview that painted an even more disturbing picture of Amber's deception. Detective Chen had asked them to recall incidents from our childhood where I had been injured during Amber's games. And suddenly, patterns they dismissed as normal sibling roughhousing took on a sinister new meaning. "Do you remember when you were 7 and broke your wrist falling off your bike?" Mom asked. "We always thought it was an accident, but the police asked us to think about the circumstances. Amber had insisted on teaching you a new trick that day. She'd loosened your helmet strap and adjusted your bike seat to an unsafe height." Dad nodded grimly. "And the time you nearly drowned in the community pool when you were 9, Amber convinced you to try some underwater game she had invented. The lifeguard said it looked like someone had pushed you down when you tried to surface." Each memory they shared revealed how thoroughly Amber had manipulated not just me, but our entire family's perception of events. She had been the concerned sister rushing to help after each accident, the creative child who just got a little too enthusiastic with her games.
The police said she's been stymieing us, Mom continued. They found notes about our family dynamics, our behavioral patterns, even our work schedules. She planned these incidents for times when they'd be alone with you, when there wouldn't be adult witnesses to what actually happened. The next morning brought a visit from Assistant District Attorney Michael Santos, who would be prosecuting Amber's case. He was a serious man in his 40s who specialized in complex assault cases, and he came with news about how the investigation was expanding. "Rachel, I need to prepare you for what's coming," he said. "This case is going to attract significant media attention. We've identified 14 victims so far, and the FBI believes there may be more. Your sister's behavior represents one of the most systematic patterns of predatory assault we've seen in this region." He explained that Amber was being charged with multiple felonies: aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, and what the prosecutor called predatory targeting of vulnerable individuals. The federal charges were still being developed, but they could include crossing state lines to commit crimes and potentially even charges related to the video recordings she'd made without consent. "The videos are particularly damaging evidence," Santos continued. "We found over 3 hours of footage showing her deliberately causing injuries to various victims. In several cases, we can clearly see her manipulating the situations to maximize potential harm." That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a woman named Jennifer Walsh, who identified herself as a victim advocate working with the other people Amber had hurt. "Rachel, I know this is incredibly difficult for you," she said, "but I wanted you to know that your courage in reporting this incident has given other victims the strength to come forward. We now have 7 people ready to testify about their experiences with your sister." She arranged for me to speak with 2 other victims by phone. The first was Maria Gonzalez, a 32-year-old teacher who had been seriously injured at a wellness retreat 6 months earlier. She approached me during a break, said she was a movement therapist, and offered to show me some techniques for back pain. I ended up with 3 herniated discs after she guided me through what she called a spinal release exercise. I was in physical therapy for months. The second victim was David Kim, a 29-year-old accountant who had met Amber at a professional development workshop. She convinced me to participate in a trust-building exercise. I ended up with a severe shoulder separation that required surgery. She stayed at the hospital with me afterward, acting like the most caring person in the world. I actually thanked her for being so supportive. Hearing their stories confirmed the pattern Detective Chen had described. Amber approached vulnerable people in settings where they were seeking help or connection, gained their trust quickly, and then orchestrated accidents that caused serious injuries. Most disturbing was how she'd maintained her helpful facade afterward, positioning herself as a caring friend or support person. "What really gets to me," Maria said, "is thinking about how she must have felt watching us suffer. We thought she was being compassionate, but she was probably just collecting data for her next victim." 3 days later, the story broke in the local media. The headline in the Portland Tribune read, "Local woman charged in systematic assault scheme." Within hours, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters wanting interviews about my experience. The media attention brought unexpected developments. Detective Chen called to tell me that the news coverage had prompted 5 additional victims to come forward, including 2 from other states who had encountered Amber at out-of-state workshops and retreats. "We're now looking at 19 confirmed victims across 4 states," she said. "The FBI has taken over coordination of the investigation because of the interstate nature of the crimes." But the media coverage also brought unwanted attention to my family. Reporters showed up at my parents' house, at my workplace, and even at the hospital. We had to hire a lawyer to help us navigate the legal and media complexities of the case. The most difficult moment came when my parents were asked to provide victim impact statements for Amber's bail hearing. The prosecutor wanted to ensure she remained in custody while awaiting trial, and our family's testimony about the long-term psychological impact of her deception was crucial evidence. "Your Honor," my father said during the hearing, We trusted this person with our most precious relationships. She lived in our home, ate at our table, and systematically hurt our older daughter while we celebrated her creativity and enthusiasm. We now realize we were enabling a predator, and we'll have to live with that knowledge for the rest of our lives. Mom's statement was even more heartbreaking. I keep thinking about all the times Rachel came to me with injuries from Amber's games, and I told her that sisters sometimes play too rough. I dismissed her pain and validated her abuser. What kind of mother does that make me?
Amber's defense attorney argued that she was suffering from mental illness and should be released to her family's custody for psychiatric evaluation. But when the judge asked if her family would be willing to take responsibility for her supervision, my parents both said no. "We cannot trust our own judgment when it comes to this person," Dad told the court. "We've proven ourselves incapable of recognizing dangerous behavior when it's happening in our own home." The judge denied bail, stating that Amber represented a clear and ongoing danger to public safety. That evening, as I sat in my hospital room processing everything that had happened, I received a call from Agent Rodriguez with news that would change everything once again. "Rachel, we've made a breakthrough in the investigation," she said. "We've found evidence that Amber has been in contact with other individuals who share her interests in causing harm. We believe she may be part of a larger network of people who exchange information about targeting and injuring victims." The investigation was about to expand beyond anything we'd imagined, and I was going to be at the center of exposing something much darker than one disturbed individual's private pathology. The revelation about a larger network hit me like a physical blow. Agent Rodriguez arrived at my hospital room the next morning with FBI cybercrime specialist, Agent Marcus Webb, both carrying encrypted laptops and looking grimmer than I'd ever seen them. "Rachel, what we're about to show you is going to be difficult to process," Agent Rodriguez began. "When we analyzed Amber's computer and phone records, we discovered she's been part of an online community that we can only describe as a sadistic support network." Agent Webb opened his laptop and showed me sanitized screenshots of forum discussions. The content made my stomach turn. Dozens of users sharing detailed strategies for causing accidental injuries to people in their lives, comparing techniques and celebrating successful incidents. "Your sister was one of the most active members," he explained. "She used the username TrustFall23 and had been posting detailed reports about her victims for over 3 years. She was teaching others how to replicate her methods." The forums contained step-by-step guides for everything from trust exercises that resulted in broken bones to meditation techniques that caused concussions. Members shared photos of their victims' injuries and detailed accounts of the emotional manipulation required to maintain their cover afterward. "We've identified at least 47 active members across 12 states," Agent Rodriguez said. "This isn't just about Amber anymore. We're looking at a coordinated network of individuals who have been systematically targeting vulnerable people for years." The scope was staggering. FBI field offices across the country were now investigating similar patterns of accidental injuries in their jurisdictions. The network had been operating for nearly 5 years, with members sharing victim profiles, effective locations for targeting people, and even financial compensation schemes for particularly successful incidents. "Financial compensation?" I asked. Not sure I wanted to hear the answer. Agent Webb pulled up another document. "Some members were being paid by others to target specific individuals. We found evidence of a marketplace where people could essentially hire someone to injure a person in their life while maintaining plausible deniability." The investigation revealed that Amber had received over $15,000 over 2 years for injuring specific targets chosen by other network members. She'd become a sort of freelance predator, traveling to different states to hurt people she'd never met before, following detailed instructions provided by the person paying for the service. One of her victims was a woman in Seattle whose husband wanted her injured so he could control her movement and finances.
Another was a college student whose roommate paid Amber to cause an injury that would prevent her from participating in athletic scholarships. As the federal investigation expanded, I found myself in the center of what became known as the Trust Network case. My willingness to testify and my clear medical evidence had provided the breakthrough that exposed an entire criminal organization. The media coverage intensified dramatically. Major news networks picked up the story, and I was asked to appear on several national television programs to discuss my experience. With the help of victim advocates and prosecutors, I decided to speak publicly about what had happened, hoping to encourage other victims to come forward and to warn people about these predatory tactics. My first television interview was with Sarah Mitchell from ABC News. Sitting in the hospital room with my arms still in a cast, I told my story to a national audience. The most important thing people need to understand, I said during the interview, is that these predators are extremely skilled at appearing helpful and trustworthy. My sister didn't seem dangerous. She seemed enthusiastic and caring. That's what made her so effective. The response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours of the broadcast, the FBI received over 200 calls from people reporting similar experiences. Some had been injured in circumstances they'd always questioned. Others had witnessed suspicious behavior at workshops or retreats. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a forensic psychologist working with the FBI, contacted me to explain the psychological profile they developed for members. She explained during a consultation call, "These individuals typically display what we call instrumental sadism. Unlike impulsive violence, their behavior is calculated and goal-oriented. They derive satisfaction not just from causing pain, but from the complex manipulation required to maintain their cover." So, as I sat in my hospital room, recovering from my sister's betrayal, the investigation was uncovering a truly frightening network of inside predators who had been acting undercover for years.
She continued, "What makes your sister's case particularly significant is how she documented everything. Her journals and videos provide unprecedented insight into how these predators think and operate. This evidence will help us develop better prevention and detection strategies." 6 weeks after my injury, I was finally discharged from the hospital to begin outpatient physical therapy. The irony of returning to work as a patient at the same facility where I'd been treating others wasn't lost on anyone. My colleagues at Riverside Physical Therapy had followed the case closely, and they welcomed me back with incredible support. "You know," said my colleague Janet during one of my therapy sessions, "several of us have been thinking about the warning signs we might have missed with some of our own patients. People who came in with injuries that seemed inconsistent with their explanations, but we didn't want to seem suspicious or accusatory." This conversation led to something unexpected and meaningful. Our clinic developed new protocols for identifying potential victims of intentional harm disguised as accidents. We created training materials for healthcare providers about recognizing suspicious injury patterns and approaching sensitive conversations with patients who might be victims. The trial began 8 months later. By then, the federal investigation had expanded to include 73 defendants across 15 states. Amber's case became the cornerstone of the prosecution's strategy because we had the clearest evidence and the most comprehensive documentation of the criminal behavior. Taking the witness stand to testify against my own sister was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. She sat at the defendant's table looking exactly like the person I had grown up with, but everything I now knew about her had fundamentally changed how I saw her. "Can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant?" the prosecutor asked. "I thought she was my sister. Now I understand she was my predator." During cross-examination, Amber's defense attorney tried to portray the incidents as mental illness rather than criminal behavior, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury saw her detailed journals, her video recordings, her communications with other network members, and her financial records showing payment for hurting strangers. The verdict came after only 6 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts. Amber was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The judge's comments during sentencing captured the gravity of what she'd done.
The defendant didn't just hurt individuals. She violated the fundamental trust that allows society to function. She weaponized human compassion and turned it against her victims. As the network trials continued over the following year, 67 of the 73 defendants were convicted and sentenced to terms ranging from 8 to 30 years in prison. The investigation led to policy changes in how law enforcement handles suspicious injury patterns and resulted in new training protocols for healthcare providers, social workers, and victim advocates. My parents and I went through extensive family therapy to process the trauma of learning that someone we'd loved and trusted had been systematically harmful. It took months to work through the guilt, confusion, and grief of losing not just Amber, but our entire understanding of our family history. The hardest part, my mother said during one session, is accepting that we may never understand why she chose to hurt people. We keep looking for explanations that would make sense, but sometimes people just choose to cause harm. 2 years after my injury, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I left my job at the physical therapy clinic to become a victim advocate, specializing in cases involving trusted perpetrators. Working with the FBI and various law enforcement agencies, I help train officers and prosecutors to recognize these complex manipulation cases. Victims of trusted perpetrators face unique challenges. They're often dealing not just with physical injuries, but with the psychological trauma of realizing someone they loved was intentionally hurting them. My work has taken me across the country, speaking at conferences, training healthcare providers, and supporting other victims who are dealing with similar betrayals. Each case reminds me that what happened to me wasn't unique, but it was preventable if we'd known what to look for. The Trust Network case ultimately led to federal legislation requiring healthcare providers to receive training in recognizing intentional injury patterns. It also resulted in new protocols for investigating suspicious accidents and better support systems for victims who discover their injuries weren't accidental. 3 years later, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through the FBI. It was from Amber, writing from federal prison. The letter was brief and unsettling. Rachel, I've been thinking about our childhood and all the games we played together. I want you to know that I remember every single reaction you had to pain, every expression, every sound, every tear. Those memories help me get through my time here. Thank you for being such a perfect subject for my research. I shared the letter with my therapist, who helped me understand it as a final attempt at manipulation and control. Amber was still trying to hurt me, even from prison, by forcing me to relive those traumatic experiences. But her letter had an unexpected effect. Instead of causing more pain, it crystallized my understanding of how completely I'd healed and grown beyond her influence. She was still trapped in her obsession with causing harm, while I had built a meaningful life dedicated to preventing others from experiencing what I'd gone through.
Today, 5 years after that Sunday afternoon when my arm was broken, I lead a national task force on trusted perpetrator crimes. We've helped identify and prosecute over 200 cases similar to mine, and we've developed prevention programs that are being implemented in schools, healthcare facilities, and community organizations across the country. The scar on my arm has faded, but it serves as a daily reminder of how much can change when we find the courage to question what we've always accepted as normal. Sometimes the people closest to us aren't who we think they are, and sometimes the accidents in our lives aren't accidents at all. But more importantly, it reminds me that surviving betrayal by a trusted person doesn't have to define you as a victim. It can transform you into someone who protects others, who speaks truth to power, and who helps create a world where predators can't hide behind the facade of caring. My sister taught me about human cruelty, but my recovery taught me about human resilience. And given the choice between those two lessons, I know which one has more power to change the world. If this story resonates with you, please share it with others who might benefit from understanding these warning signs. And remember, if something feels wrong about an injury or accident in your life, trust your instincts. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem most concerned about helping you heal. Next up,
2 more stories chosen just for you. If you enjoyed this, you'll want to see what's coming. Tap to keep going.